This is Moving Beyond Once Per Computer Workflows. We are joined today by William Smith, professional services engineer, who knows all the things about all the things. So we're going to let him talk. Thanks, Bill.
All right, thank you, Katie. So again, William Smith, I go by Bill. If you need to find me later on, I'll probably be hanging out or come see me at the party tonight. So today we're going to be discussing how we can move beyond once per computer workflows, or as I like to subtitle a lot of my things, building your own Death Star with Legos. So this is a great analogy to what we're all doing with Jamf Pro today. So we're taking pieces of different shaped things and we're putting them together and we're making something that's greater than the sum of its parts. So whenever I was a kid, I'd dump out all the pieces to whatever construction toy I had. It could be Lincoln Logs, it could be Legos, it could be Tinkertoys, anything like that. So on the floor was something like this. In my head was something like this. And then at the end of playtime, I had a pathetic little pony. Mama was proud of me, though. "You're so creative," she'd say. So as a kid, I had to come to the hard realization that I simply didn't have the right pieces to build anything like a Death Star, or even how to put it together if I did. Certainly not the one that was in my head. Now, I didn't have enough of the right colors, or the right shapes, or the sizes, and I didn't even have instructions to follow. But now we're grown-ups, and we've got probably one of the coolest construction kits available. What I'm going to cover with you today are what I consider to be some better practices. Now, the term best practices, which we throw around a lot, implies that there's one good way of doing things, but there's really no one good way to do things because every customer's environment is different. We all have different needs. But these are practices that I see myself recommending over and over to various customers when I visit with them. All right, so you might immediately dismiss some of the things that I'm going to be discussing, and that's okay. That's okay. You're entitled to your opinion, but expressing your opinion comes with the responsibility to defend it. I'm going to discuss why I think these are better practices, and then I'm going to defend my opinions here. And that's your first takeaway from this whole session. Have an opinion about why you do things the way you do them, and then be prepared to defend it. If you can't defend your workflow management practices, that may be an indicator that you need to revisit them. All right, you can say maybe I file vault encrypt all of my Macs because then they are immediately complying with my company security policy. Or you might say I put pages, keynote, and numbers into self-service because no department has said that these are required pieces of software. That's defending your work. You need confidence in the work that you do and confidence in your methodologies. If a member of your team disagrees with you, or one of your internal customers, maybe a departmental manager, disagrees with you, state your opinion about why you manage things the way you do, and then ask him or her to counter your opinion with a better one. Disagreement is fine. Changing your opinion is absolutely acceptable. Someone changing his or her mind may very well be why we have a round Death Star today instead of a square one. And apologies to anybody, I did mix the universes here. It's actually a board ship. All right, so the remainder of my discussion is going to be helping you solidify your device management opinions. So we're going to start simple, we're going to work our way up. Do you and your coworkers agree on the way you do things? How things that you're named in your Jamf server, do you agree with yourself over time? I'm going to throw out some better practices for naming opinions in your Jamf server, or for naming objects in your Jamf server, and explain why mixing up your taxonomies is confusing to you and your customers. As children, we learned that there are 3 parts to the routine of playtime. We'll take what you already know, and then we'll apply that to device management. And as children, we were probably bad about completing part 3. Fair warning, as adults, we're still just as bad. We'll cover that in a little bit. Jamf Pro makes it easy to take something like an extension attribute, make a smart group, and then apply it to a policy. And that would help us maybe install a piece of software. We'll talk about, though, why that's not really management. And then finally, I'm going to point you to some device management templates to help you enforce your baselines for your devices as you move away from simply executing tasks. All right, so let's get started. Let's first talk about naming styles and taxonomies. In Jamf Pro, we create various objects. They turn into lists of things. For example, as I import or name departments, I'm creating a list. As I add scripts, I'm creating a list. As I add smart groups, I create a list, and so on. When I visit with customers, one of the most common requests that they make to me is, can you help us clean up our Jamf server? It's been running for a few years, and several of us have been doing things our own way. Now we have a lot of duplicate smart groups and a lot of junk that we just really need to get rid of. So a Jamf Pro server makes lists in all of these places. Cleaning up a Jamf server isn't quick because so many things are tied together, but you have to start somewhere. So I suggest that you start with categories. And the first thing you need to do is define your taxonomies. All right, so let's play a game that many of us likely grew up with. One of these things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the others, and I'm not singing, by the time I finish my song? Taxonomies are all about classifying and grouping things, identifying common characteristics, and then making a collection. Of these 4 objects, which one doesn't belong and why? Anyone? Yeah, gimme, that's a gimme. All right, we're comparing rectangles versus circular items. Pretty straightforward. Now, if I were to apply the same principle to this list of categories, what one doesn't belong and why? So we've got accounting, applications, IT, marketing, production, and sales. What doesn't belong? Absolutely right. Everything in this list is a department except for applications. It doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the items. Applications doesn't fit the taxonomy. All right, let's keep playing our game. What's the taxonomy here? All right, this one's actually got 2 possible answers. If we see rectangles and ovals, then our taxonomy is shapes. If we see purples and yellows, then our taxonomy is colors. Either way, we've identified a way to classify everything in this group, and we've identified that everything still fits nicely into 2 categories. Again, applying the same principle to this list of categories, for something like a school, I may be able to classify everyone as part of a building and also classify everyone by his or her grade in the school. We have dual taxonomies here, yet there's a clear delineation between the 2. And while there's overlap between the 2 taxonomies, try to avoid overlap within a taxonomy. For example, something can't be both purple and yellow, except for Katie's hair. You should see her from like a few years ago. But things can also neither be rectangular and circular. All right, last game. What's the taxonomy here? Maybe symbols, maybe red and yellow, maybe logos, I heard that. There is no taxonomy. At least no taxonomy that you and I can decipher. Maybe it means something to somebody. So what if we consider this list? All right, now does this make a little bit more sense to you? What's its taxonomy? All right, it makes sense to us, but doesn't necessarily make sense to our end users. It's an IT-centric taxonomy. You and I get it, but do our users? No. If you saw something like this in self-service, it's as good as having a dancing banana. It means nothing to you. Your taxonomies need to make sense not only to you, but to your end users. if you don't pay attention to your taxonomies, you're going to end up with a categories list like this in self-service. It's not very long, but can you figure it out? You might also notice something else about this list. What order is it in? Is there a taxonomy you can recognize? All right, so while you can certainly assign higher and lower priorities to your category names, I suggest that you do so sparingly, and only when you really need to float something to the top, or like updates, or maybe float something to the bottom, bury it down here like maintenance. That's a good time to set your priorities and rearrange things. Don't do it just willy-nilly. We all learned our ABCs and our 1, 2, 3s as kids, and you know what? Those are still 2 pretty good ways of organizing things today. All right, so that was just about categories. But think about the way that you name everything else. So here's some better practices that I've seen. For packages, I suggest these naming conventions. Include the developer name, the full application package name, and the application version. Including the version is useful because you're going to eventually need to update the software. Sometimes you need to remove an older version of the software before you can install the newer version. Probably the most important suggestion that I can offer, though, is to avoid abbreviations. And this applies to everything you name in the Jamf server, not just packages. Not everyone abbreviates the same way. Not everything has an abbreviation. And sometimes they just don't make sense. If you're keeping more characters than you're deleting, you're probably doing something wrong. For scripts and policies, I suggest these ideas for naming. Scripts and policies take action. They affect change on a machine. Name them for what they do, don't name them for the computers, the department, or the group you're scoping. And that means use verbs. And follow those verbs with an object receiving the action. If you can't tell, I was a journalism major before I ever got into IT. And to complete this thought, and just to get us started talking about moving away from running items once per computer toward ongoing policies, name these items that take action so that you can reuse them later. All right. Here's an interesting test you can do while you're here at JNUC. Log into your Jamf server and then pick somebody else here from the conference, from a different organization, not a coworker, and show it to them and see if they understand what your scripts and policies are doing. I have some items here. Can you tell me what the first one does? Very good. You figured it out. It's abbreviated clearly. It looks like a script, but here's a better name. All right. Note that the new script doesn't say it's setting the central time zone, though. And that's because we have a perfectly good script up on Jamf Nation that you can use. You can add it to any policy. It's reusable. And all you have to do is specify the central time zone, the eastern time zone, whatever time zone in the policy as you apply the script. But you're only going to put the script into the server one time. Make it reusable. All right. Second item, accounting setup. What's that about? Who knows? That's a great answer, actually, right there. Maybe this name's going to help you understand what this policy is doing. All right. Now, this third example is a policy, and it's for installing an Office update. Seems pretty straightforward. It starts with a verb. It follows with an object. Great. But why is this not a better practice? What was that? Version. It's specific to a single item. It's an Office 15.34 update. In 6 months after everyone is running 15.40, will you ever need this policy again? This is how CRUF starts in your Jamf server. You put something in for one-time use, and then you never remember to take it out. Keep policy names generic. You can always reuse a policy that updates Office. All right, finally, recon. What am I doing with it? I don't know, because I'm missing a verb to tell me what action I'm taking. A better policy name for recon would be update inventory. All right. I'm not going to talk about naming styles for every object in the Jamf server, but I do want to address objects that are not things like packages or take actions like scripts and policies. So for example, the name extension attribute, this name says everything that it is. It's a characteristic, or it's a feature, or a condition of something. While you may populate it with a script, an extension attribute should never affect change on your Macs, and therefore its name should never include a verb. All right, the same goes for a smart group. It's a collection of devices with specific characteristics. Smart groups don't take action. They don't include verbs. If you want to keep names simple, also, remember that we already know that these are all these Macs that have this thing in common, or these computers do these things, have these things. We don't necessarily need to make the words Mac or computers. It's assumed. And then finally, identify things that exist, not things that don't exist. All right, break up what I just said. Identify things that exist. That's easy to understand. Not things that don't exist. That double negative ought to be making your head spin when I say that. So our human minds require more processing power to comprehend negatives. Avoid making extension attributes or groups to identify missing items. All right. The first two items here are examples of extension attributes. These can collect additional pieces of information from your Macs that Jamf doesn't collect natively. Any idea of what the first one collects? All right, we know it's something about Office. I heard somebody say version. Are you so sure? All right, how about now? So the original name had part of the description, the adjective, but it didn't contain the noun, the what. It was like saying, I have a green, instead of saying, I have a green thumb. All right, what about the second one, location? Now, at first, you might think this one's pretty straightforward until I ask you to give me an example of location that I'm thinking. Anyone? What's that? Network location? Building? All sorts. So someone might give me network location, they might give me building, they might give me Minneapolis, they might give me Grumpy's, they might give me storage closet. In my example, I really want to know what the cart number is for my iPads or for my MacBooks. All right. So the next two items are examples of smart group names. Now, why is the name crash plan not installed not following a better practice? It's a negative. It's trying to find something that doesn't exist. It's harder for your brain to process. So think about this. If every Mac in my organization is required to run crash plan, what is my true scope? It's not devices that don't have crash plan, it's all devices. I'm scoping to everything. My policy should be installing to all computers, but it should exclude the computers that already have crash plan. All right. Again, this goes toward our objective of using ongoing and reusable policies. Ongoing policies will help us achieve a baseline across our devices rather than run once policies that accomplish one-time tasks. So finally, my last example is similar to the crash plan example. We quite often name our smart groups based on what we'd like the end result to be, rather than the current state. Now, you tell me, why would an administrator ever make this smart group in the first place? You need to file vault encrypt your devices. All right. Again, we're looking for a negative when we should be looking to identify a positive. All right. So names are important. How you name things in your Jamf server is very important. Names in your Jamf server should not be reflective of what you want to accomplish, who you want to affect, how you want to impact something. names should reflect the current state of something, or what an object does, or what it contains. And if you think that's too hard or impossible, I'm going to point you to the official LEGO Pick-a-Brick site, where you can order more than 1,400 LEGO pieces. Each piece is uniquely and descriptively named. You can find exactly what you need if you know the taxonomy. If someone can develop a style for naming 1,400 pieces of a toy set, you can develop and plan a style for your Jamf server. And we'll build on these names later as we start putting these pieces together. All right, let's move on to playtime. We're going to take something that you probably learned as a child and apply it to device management. As children, we learned that there are 3 parts to the routine of playtime. We were very good about completing parts 1 and 2, but not so much part 3. As adults, we're probably still just as bad about completing part 3. So what are these 3 magical parts with our toys? I'll give you the first 2, and you tell me number 3. We need to put our toys away. All right. I know what you're probably thinking right now. You're saying to yourself, Bill, how else does this 3-part routine affect the way I do almost everything in my life? All right, glad you asked. Here are some examples. You go out for dinner. The waiter serves you, you eat dinner, and then you pay the bill. But wow, that was a really nice restaurant. And the check reminds you that why you don't eat out very often. You contemplate your options in the end, but in the end you do the right thing. Now you decide that you're going to be eating at home more often. So the next evening you decide to stay home, and you're going to make dinner, spaghetti and meatballs using Grandma's secret recipe. So you eat, and then you wash the dishes, right? Maybe you're not so good about washing the dishes, and after dinner you just kind of let them sit in the sink to soak, where they seem to just stay for a while. But who today doesn't have a dishwasher, right? Now you make dinner, you eat your spaghetti and meatballs, and when you're done, you load the dishwasher. You put in the detergent, you push start, and in a couple of hours you come back and you pull the dishes out and put them away. Or not. They just seem to magically stay there until you're compelled to do something about them. Everything is generally as easy as 1, 2, 3, but most of us tend to avoid 3 because we either don't like it or we forget. Now, we don't like putting away our toys, we don't like putting away our toys after we get them and we play with them. We don't like paying the bills after going out to a nice restaurant and eating a nice meal. We don't like doing the dishes after fixing and eating our favorite foods. We have the same behavior with our device management. We love pulling the shrink wrap off a box and preparing a shiny new Mac, but we don't care so much about fixing those broken devices or taking them in for repair. If you're in support, you probably find some pleasure in getting a call from one of your users and helping them fix a problem. But then maybe you're not so good about going back and closing that ticket because you don't like the paperwork. And in our Jamf server, I've been there. In our Jamf server, we create scripts and policies to install specific updates or applications. They run great for a while and then they complete their task, but we don't go back and then delete them. Or maybe we don't set up a policy to uninstall an application. You're making a desktop technician do that manually whenever they have to troubleshoot the app. How can we get ourselves so that we do the first 2 things that we enjoy, but not have to do the ones that we don't enjoy? We don't. This is reality. This is not Fantasy Island, people. It's important. We learned as children we have to put away our toys. As administrators, we have to accept that fixing devices, retiring them, uninstalling applications, and closing tickets are all part of the cycle of management. Now, maybe we can make step 3 easier to do. For example, when we create a policy in our Jamf server that we know is temporary, we can put a reminder in our calendar to tell us to delete it later. If we're clever, we even put the link into the policy to help us find it. Now, that may work for some folks, Others may think this is just adding work, and they're going to eventually just forget doing this too. If you think about it, this is still step 3. We're just replacing the step of actually remembering to delete something with something else to remind us to delete something. Still, it's better than nothing. So something else we can consider is making our final step 3 the initial step of another cycle. So for example, the life cycle of a Mac laptop may be about 3 to 4 years, but it still has some value and there's some use left in it. Retiring it from daily use by a user is an ideal time to go ahead and redeploy it for occasional use as a loaner. As a temporary device, it has enough horsepower for a user waiting for a replacement laptop or repair. If you still want to eke out more life, you can always retire it from the loaner and then make it maybe a kiosk or something like that. Starting another cycle is a great way to avoid step 3, but eventually we're still going to hit step 3. It's a certainty like death or taxes. But if we only do these things once, but what if we only had to do these things once and we didn't have to do them over and over? So this is where we start talking about moving away from tasks and toward management. Generally, when we're taught the basics of using Jamf during our jump starts, we're told that these are our 3 steps for managing devices. All right? We run recon to find out what devices need, we group them together, and then we install them, install something or make a change. So when we see our first policy actually do something on that machine over there that I'm not touching, we get our first tease of being a Jamf administrator. We think, yay, we're managing. I'm here to break it to you that we're not really managing. You're certainly completing a task, that's great. You're certainly doing something important, but that's not management. Again, hearkening back to what we were taught in our jump starts, this is probably what we assumed management looks like because we were learning the basics of putting things together with Jamf. But actually, this is just a task. It's a linear workflow. It does something and then it stops. If my policy installed Firefox, but my end user later removed Firefox, how is that management? My user has overridden my management decision. Management is constant. It's self-evaluating, and it's ongoing. Use your Jamf server as a management tool, not a task tool. If my policy installs Firefox and my user later removes it, Jamf should put it right back on. So let's make sure we define our possible management scenarios here. So when I say managed, I mean we have defined a baseline set of apps and settings for the entire organization or maybe a group inside the organization. And every member of that group or every member of my company will have that application. It's unconditional. That's a baseline. Apps and settings that we apply in self-service are still managed, but we let the user opt in to using the app. So question, kind of a side note here, if we deploy an app by self-service, who's responsible for keeping it up to date? We are, absolutely. But we're not responsible for the apps that the user installs him or herself. We can't take on that task. So management to us is going to be baseline apps, ones that everybody is required to have, or anything that goes into self-service. All right, let's start putting these pieces together here. Mozilla Firefox, we're going to manage this. So that means it's a baseline app. Every device in our organization is going to get this. Following the 1, 2, 3 steps, we need to be able to deploy it, keep it updated, and later remove it. I'm going to elaborate on a method here that the IBM folks discussed last year during their Mac at Work presentation. If you get a chance, go back and watch that one too. It falls in line great with the idea of creating a baseline for ongoing management rather than separate tasks. So to manage this application, we're going to need a Firefox package, 2 smart groups, 4 policies, and a script. All right away you're probably thinking, Bill, that's a lot more than I've ever configured for just a stupid application. And I get you. But I'm going to reply to you that with the exception of the installer package, all these other things that are in here, you're never going to touch again. You don't have to recreate them, ever. All right, let's take a look at each of these pieces. So the first two items are smart groups. Here's our first smart group. It only identifies if Firefox is installed. That's it. Is Firefox installed, yes or no? If it's not, devices fall into the group. If it is, devices fall out of the group. And then the second one, which is kind of complementary, it identifies, is it up to date? And that's it. If either of these two criteria is met, is it installed, is it up to date, or I'm sorry, if either one of these is not met, then we consider the devices to have fallen below our baseline, and then our goal is to meet both criteria for the devices and then bring it back up to baseline automatically. All right, let's keep going and look at the four policies that we've got. Again, taking the lead from IBM's Mac at Work presentation last year, I'm going to create a main policy. All right, this is the only policy I'll ever modify. And the only thing I'll ever do with it is update the package. Note that it's ongoing and scoped to all computers. However, it has a custom trigger, which means it's never going to run until I actually send a command for it to do so. It won't run at login, it won't run at recurring check-in or enrollment complete. It won't show up in self-service. What good is it? All right, here's the second policy that actually installs the software. It calls the main policy by its trigger name, then it updates inventory to let Jamf server have the information and keep that current. It too is ongoing and it runs at every check-in, which is every 15 minutes by default. Why is that? Because if the software is not installed, I should be able to safely install it without interrupting the user. It'll just happen in the background. So I can let this happen as quickly as possible using recurring check-in. So this is a baseline app. Every computer is supposed to get it. So what's our scope? All computers. But we don't need to install it on all computers, just those that don't have it. So that's why we're scoping to all managed clients and excluding our smart group that identifies computers where it's already installed. All right, now that Firefox is installed, how do we keep it up to date? If I deploy a newer version of Firefox over an older version, I'm risking merging the app bundles and breaking the app. Therefore, I'm going to choose to remove the old version of Firefox before installing the new version of Firefox. I'm going to do that with a simple script, and I'll label the $4 script parameter as just application path. That's going to let me use this script over and over in multiple policies for multiple applications, and all I ever need to do is enter the path to the application in the policy and leave the script alone. I'm making the script reusable. Making the third policy for updates is easy. I'm going to clone the policy to give myself a head start. First, it uses my script to remove the old version of Firefox. Then it calls the main policy to install Firefox, and then finally it updates inventory to keep the Jamf server's information current. It still runs ongoing, but the trigger this time is login. The reason I'm using that as a login is because I don't want to attempt to update Firefox while it might still be running. And at login, it's a safe bet that it's not going to be. So the scope this time is not all computers. Remember, we're updating. But rather, we're scoping to computers with Firefox installed. And then I'm excluding those computers that are already up to date with Firefox. All right, and last, as part of 1, 2, 3 management, a better practice is to go ahead and build in an uninstall tool. This is handy for desktop technicians for troubleshooting, or if you decide to make these policies Firefox available in self-service, you give your users the ability to remove it. For a completely managed app, I'm going to put this policy in self-service, but I'm only going to make it available to my technicians. This is a baseline app. I don't want my users removing it. For my technicians, they can log in, they can remove it. All right, so all I have to do is clone the update policy that we just created. We remove the command to install Firefox, and then I'll change the trigger to self-service and then scope just to a user or group, and that's it. All right, we've put together a lot of Legos, and we've set up a complex set of workflows, but here's the beauty to taking all this time to do this work. When it comes time to update Firefox 56 to 57, you only need to do 3 things. First, you're going to package and add Firefox 57 to Jamf. All right. Then we're going to go into our second smart group, the one that says is Firefox up to date, and we're going to update the version in that. We're going to change it from 56 to 57. And then third, we're going to go update that main policy with the new package. And that's it. Your Jamf server takes care of the rest. You're not recreating any new groups or policies, but you're reusing the ones that you've got. And the same set of smart groups and policies translates very well to self-service with just a couple of tweaks. And if you scope to groups instead of all computers, here's what's really kind of cool. The same set of policies can automatically remove and add installed applications based on the user who's assigned to that device. It can reconfigure itself if you change the group. All right, so you all wrote that down, right? All right. So for complete instructions on creating this workflow, I've put this out on GitHub. All you have to do is look for Jamf IT 123. I'll point you to this page. I've also posted the Firefox as an example, both for a baseline app as well as a self-service app, and I do stuff with Office. I've got an Office example out there too. That's not going to be quite so simple to uninstall, but I've got a script for uninstalling Office 2016. And I'm linking to other workflows out there as well. If any of you were listened to Katie English's CIS baseline for security, this is very much the exact same thing. You're using Jamf to find something, to remediate it, and then keep it current. All right, so much like a Death Star, Jamf Pro has one purpose. And instead of destroying planets, though, it's going to manage devices. Very similar. Let's recap what we've discussed. So I want you to have an opinion about why you do things the way you do, and then be prepared to defend them. Changing your opinion is absolutely acceptable. I want you to define your taxonomies, and your taxonomies need to make sense to your end users too. I need you to name your policies and your scripts for what they do. I need you to name your smart groups for what they contain. Avoid negatives, they hurt the brain. Every process has a beginning, middle, and an end. Manage using 1, 2, 3, repeat, 1, 2, 3, repeat, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And then tasks that just run once are not management. Therefore, use your server, your Jamf server, as a management tool, not a task tool. Remember, management is constant, it's self-evaluating, and it's ongoing. But to accomplish this, your groups, policies, scripts, etc., they must be reusable. All right, and then last but not least, as Mama used to say, organization takes time, and organization takes time. Plan how your Lego pieces will fit together, and then build an awesome Death Star. All right, if anyone has questions, we have 2 mics right here. Thank you. Yippers.
What was that Katie English thing you were talking about?
Katie English, this is one of my managers right here. She has a GitHub repository as well as a presentation from last year and this year, so get this year's, on CIS management, security baselines, how to make sure that your Macs comply with a certain level of security. If they fall below baseline, Jamf automatically brings them back up.
All recapped on the Jamf blog, helpfully. So
Wonderful.
You'll
Yes.
be able to find it there.
All right. Yes, sir.
For uninstalling software, do you kind of recommend still indexing your packages and then doing,
that's a good
uninstall
question.
or doing it the real cool way of, sudo remove and finding what really got installed and killing it all.
All right. So when it comes to indexing packages, it's only going to work with DMGs. I like using a script, and here's why. Again, I'm defending my actions here. If I index a package, that information is stored inside Jamf. But then to remove it, I have to add the package to my removal policy. But then as I update the package, that's a second policy I also need to update. So I like using a script because I know what I'm getting rid of. And I know not everybody's a scripter here, but I encourage you, get into scripting even if you're kind of afraid of it. It's worth understanding how scripts work and use scripts. But a script will let me only have to manage one policy. Yeah.
So this is the first I've heard of triggers being used in a user experience where they go to self-service, they press a button, they press a trigger. And my general question probably could be answered by anyone in this room, but when you call that trigger, does it delay the progress bar or does it go straight to the end?
So when you technically self-service, clicking a button is a trigger.
Right.
I call it that even though we don't say that. So when you click it, let's say you're clicking the update trigger. In that policy, you are running the script to remove the old version of Firefox. Toward the end, it's calling the main policy that actually does the work. You're still seeing the progress bar because the policy hasn't really finished yet.
Okay.
Then it takes inventory. That's when the progress bar stops.
Yeah, that was my question was, will the user experience be the same? Do they still see the progress bar, and when the progress bar is done, they have the icon on the top?
Yes. So long as the progress bar is actually a child of the first policy that you're running. And so long as it's still running, calling other policies, that progress bar is still in effect. All right. Anyone else?
Okay, thank you, Bill.